Prince Edward Island cannot export fresh potatoes to the United States. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency made that call after potato wart was discovered at 2 farms in October.
Strengthening and reaffirming, let's say, our phytosanitary measures on fresh potatoes. And the second decisions being CFIA suspending export permits for fresh potatoes to the U.S.
American brands like McDonald's, KFC, Five Guys, and countless smaller diners are on edge. Even households that rely on bulk potato bags for everyday meals are feeling the pressure. The reason? The core ingredient of their menu. Their comfort food, and for some, their cultural staple, potatoes, is slipping away. For decades, Canadian potatoes were the quiet backbone of America's food industry, feeding everything from fast food giants to family kitchens. The supply was stable, reliable, and cheap. But over the past few months, something has shifted. Warehouses that once overflowed with Canadian shipments are now running light. Distributors are reporting gaps. Restaurants are shrinking portions, rewriting menus, and raising prices just to survive. A plate of fries that used to cost $3.50 is now selling for $5.25, and still, customers complain about the quality dropping. This isn't a minor supply hiccup, it's a structural shock to one of North America's most dependable food pipelines, and it's happening quietly. No strikes, no viral protests, no official trade war declarations, just a sudden squeeze on America's favorite crop. Meanwhile, Canada's Prime Minister has been photographed shaking hands with Asian trade leaders over a $1 billion agricultural deal, leaving American buyers scrambling and confused. So how did one of the most reliable cross-border trade flows suddenly break? And why is America's closest food supplier now looking halfway across the world for business? In this video, let's find out. On April 2nd, Washington made a decision that would ripple through every diner, fast food chain, and family kitchen across America. In one signature move, the Trump administration slapped a 35% tariff on Canadian potatoes. There were no consultations, no gradual rollouts, no warning shots, just a hard economic wall built overnight. Officials called it a trade fairness adjustment, a necessary step to protect American farmers. But behind those political optics was an economic earthquake that caught nearly everyone off guard. Almost instantly, prices reacted like a fire alarm had been pulled. A bag of imported Canadian potatoes that previously sold for $22 now landed on American soil, costing $30. A standard plate of fries at diners and fast food outlets, which had long hovered at $3.50, jumped to $5.25. For consumers, it wasn't just about paying more, it was about paying more for less. Portions shrank, quality dipped, and a food culture that had been steady for decades suddenly felt fragile. You see, for generations, America's potato habit relied heavily on Canada. In 2024 alone, Canada exported 350,000 metric tons of potatoes to the United States, enough to feed 17 million households annually, particularly in northern states where local potato supply is limited by harsh winters. This wasn't simply commerce, it was tradition. Prince Edward Island potatoes were to American diners what Tuesday Night Football was to cable television. Consistent, reliable, and almost invisible in how seamlessly it worked. Until April 2nd, that is, when Washington showed it was willing to gamble one of the most stable trade pipelines in North America for the sake of a domestic headline. What Washington likely expected was some back and forth, a heated exchange of press releases, maybe even some Canadian counter-tariffs. But what happened was far more unnerving. Nothing. There were no loud threats from Ottawa, no retaliatory taxes, no angry television soundbites. Instead, Canada simply walked away. Canadian processors like McCain and Cavendish Farms, companies that had long sent thousands of frozen fry containers south every month, started quietly cutting back contracts. Truck shipments slowed. Cold storage facilities reduced operating hours. And on Canadian farms, decisions were made to plant fewer acres of potatoes because their biggest buyer, the United States, had made the numbers no longer work. Statistics Canada data tells the story. In provinces like Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, and Alberta, farmers reduced their planting acreage by 15 to 25% this season. These weren't decisions driven by weather disasters or pest outbreaks. They were cold, economic choices. When your primary market taxes your product like it's a luxury import rather than a food staple, planting fewer fields becomes survival, not defiance. On the U.S. side, the impact was immediate and highly visible. Restaurants had a choice: absorb the cost of importing Canadian potatoes or switch to cheaper domestic options. Many chose the second option, and customers noticed instantly. Freeze lost their signature crispness, turning limp and uneven in color. Some even carried a faint chemical aftertaste from lesser quality domestic crops, bred more for yield than flavor. A diner regular in Minnesota summed it up bluntly. "I paid $5 for fries that tasted like wet cardboard. I used to eat here twice a week. Now I bring my lunch." Franchise owners across the Midwest echoed the same complaint. Customers were unhappy, sales were dipping, and portions were shrinking because passing the full cost to diners meant losing them altogether. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on the latest news stories on geopolitics, economics, and current affairs impacting your lives. What made Canada's response so strategic was what it didn't do. It didn't retaliate with tariffs of its own, risking a trade war spiral. Instead, Canada turned inward and eastward. Ottawa decided to diversify its markets and insulate its domestic economy from the whims of a single foreign buyer. In April, Prime Minister Carney landed in Asia, where he signed a $1.6 billion agricultural trade agreement with Japan, South Korea, and Indonesia. The deal focused heavily on processed potatoes and premium frozen goods, markets hungry for high-quality Canadian agricultural products. This wasn't just a quick fix. It was a structural shift. Farms that had once been built around serving one dominant buyer began supplying directly to Canadian grocery chains and even food banks. Domestic prices remained stable, hovering around $4.50 to $4.99 per bag, shielding Canadian households from the shock that Americans were experiencing. Surplus potatoes flowed to community food programs, improving food security for low-income families and ensuring that every harvested crop still had a home. The numbers showed how fast Canada adapted. In 2024, PEI exported $8 million worth of fresh potatoes to Indonesia. Thailand became Canada's largest non-U.S. importer, purchasing more than $4 million worth of fresh and seed potatoes. Caribbean nations like Trinidad and Panama combined for over $13 million in Canadian potato imports. In short, Canada didn't just recover its lost business, it began reshaping its future. But shifting to new markets wasn't easy. For decades, Canada's potato export infrastructure had been optimized for the U.S. Trucks could move products across the border in a matter of hours, making supply chains fast and predictable. Asia presented a whole new logistical challenge. Shipping potatoes across the Pacific costs 20 to 35% more per ton compared to trucking them to Buffalo or Detroit. Cold chain logistics, like refrigerated transport and storage needed to maintain freshness, required significant investment, and not every producer had the capital or resources to make the leap. Moreover, while processed and frozen potato products were welcomed in Asia, raw potatoes faced strict quarantine restrictions in countries like South Korea. This meant companies like McCain, with their massive processing and export capabilities, thrived under the pivot. while smaller farms without direct buyer relationships struggled. They remained tethered to large corporations that dictated pricing and export terms. For some smaller producers, this was an uncomfortable new reality. Survival depended on adapting quickly or risk being left behind entirely. Meanwhile, the United States continued grappling with the fallout. By July 2025, Canadian potato exports to the U.S. had plummeted by 41.7%. Overall, U.S. potato imports dropped by 19%, a decline economists politely labeled policy-induced friction. But consumers didn't need an economics degree to understand what was happening. They saw it on their dinner checks and tasted it on their plates. Fast food chains like McDonald's and Wendy's, with their bulk buying power, managed to secure some stable contracts, though at higher prices. Smaller diners and mom-and-pop establishments weren't as lucky. One restaurant owner in Fargo lamented to local media, "We went from serving 3 plates of fries for $10 to barely 1.5. Our margins didn't shrink, they vanished." Customer habits shifted accordingly. Some stopped ordering fries altogether. Others reduced their frequency of eating out. For smaller towns that rely heavily on diners and fast food outlets as community hubs, the impact was more than just economic. It was cultural. Fewer customers meant fewer jobs for servers, cooks, and delivery drivers. And while Washington focused on defending the tariff as a necessary step, Canada's message was clear. There are other buyers out there, and we don't need to fight for one market when others are waiting with open arms. You see, the biggest casualty of the tariff war wasn't potatoes, it was trust. For decades, Canada and the U.S. shared one of the most stable trade relationships in the world. Disruptions were rare, and when they happened, both sides worked to resolve them quickly. This time was different. Canada didn't respond with a fight. It responded with distance. By simply walking away, Canada signaled something profound. Its economic future wouldn't be tethered to America's political mood swings. And that, experts argue, could have long-lasting consequences far beyond agriculture. Trust is the invisible glue of trade. Once broken, it takes years to repair. Companies plan investments, infrastructure, and jobs based on the assumption of stable markets. When one partner acts unpredictably, businesses look elsewhere, often permanently. Today, the U.S. still imports potatoes, but the landscape has changed. Domestic producers have filled some gaps, but often at the cost of quality and consistency. Canadian potatoes, once a staple of the American diet, now flow to markets across Asia and the Caribbean. American consumers pay more, get less, and face fewer options, all because of a policy designed for optics rather than practicality. Canada, on the other hand, has emerged more resilient. It used a moment of trade friction to diversify, modernize, and strengthen domestic systems. While challenges remain, particularly for small farms still adjusting to new realities, the overall trajectory is one of independence and expanded opportunity. Who do you think holds the upper hand in the U.S.-Canada trade war? Isn't it true that Trump did not really calculate how dependent the U.S. is on Canada before putting tariffs? In the comments section below, share your thoughts on what Canada decides to choke all the exports to the United States. Who will lose more? Canada or the United States? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring the latest news stories on geopolitics, economics, changing world order, and current affairs, things you need to stay informed. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.